Amen. A fitting song for a sermon entitled Story Time. As I'm gonna, I almost called you Pastor Ty again. As Brother Ty said, and I call him Pastor Ty because when our ministerial director for the conference, Eli Rojas, emailed me, he said pastors and said Pastor Ty, Pastor Ryan, and all this stuff. So I was calling him Pastor. It wasn't until yesterday when he texted me, he's like, by the way, I'm not actually a pastor. And I, of course, informed him that it was too late. He was already saved in my contact list on my phone as Pastor Ty. So you're at least a pastor on my phone. So it's good to be here with you guys. As they said, my name is Ryan Comeau. I was most recently the youth pastor at Hagerstown Seventh-day Adventist Church, currently in transition. There's a lot of changes going on at the conference level and in the world at large. I think that's pretty plain to see. But it's great to be here with you guys on the screen and just here in my living room, one of the easiest commutes ever. So that works pretty well. But it's been a joy, a pleasure, and a blessing being able to be a part of your service. I enjoyed seeing a lot of young people involved, getting kids involved. As I said in my bio, as Ty said in the intro, when I was young growing up, I had a lot of mentors, pastoral, teacher, other were very positive influence on me. And part of that was inclusion in worship services like this one. So it always warms my heart to see young people involved. And that song, you mentioned languages. I think it'll be interesting to see what language we talk in heaven. I have a guess, I have a theory. It's a little different than yours. My theory, and I'll explain it after this joke. If someone speaks 3 languages, they are trilingual. If someone speaks 2 languages, they're called bilingual. And if someone speaks 1 language, they're called an American. See, I have heard many different theories on what language will be spoken in heaven. My personal theory is that it's English, not because it's the best, but because it's the one that the people who, for some reason, can't learn other languages already know. But hey, in heaven we'll have new bodies, new minds, so maybe we'll be able to learn more languages too, and we can speak much more heavenly sounding languages. But yeah, as we mentioned, I'm able to tune in just from my living room. I think technology is great. It's wonderful. It can also be a pain at times, as we've seen here this morning as well. Just sometimes the connection or the machine you're using just doesn't want to put up the fight that you're wanting to. But it's been interesting. As I mentioned, like there's a lot of changes. Of course, COVID-19 being the major world changer that hit us not a little less than a year ago now, at least back when it started making big effects on our life. And obviously it's a huge tragedy, and I hope we get out of it soon. But it's also, as a pastor, it's been encouraging to see how different pastors, churches, church leaders have sort of stepped up to the plate and found new ways of still having church, new ways to minister. There are churches on Zoom. Some churches started live streaming. Hagerstown live streamed before COVID, but we upgraded our equipment, so we stepped it up. There were, visits being done via Facebook, because you can do calls through that now, and all sorts of ways technology has been useful. My wife and I, she's listening off camera. My wife and I, we started a YouTube channel to cover some Sabbath schools. And I'm bringing this up not to brag, but to warn you, to warn me too, and to warn you and remind me. Because normally when I'm here in my living room, I'm actually standing right now, partly because it's what I'm used to, but also because when I'm here talking to a camera in my living room on my couch, I go into YouTube mentality. And when you're talking for a YouTube video, you can mess up. You can make a mistake. You can say the wrong thing. You can do 5, 6, 7, 89 takes, however many it takes. And you can go back, do more retakes, or do editing, fix it in editing. This is live. Can't do that. If I say the wrong thing, you're stuck with hearing it. I'm stuck with saying it. But yeah, here we go. But yeah, technology, it's wonderful. It's like a tool. It can be sort of like a hammer. You can use it to build things, or you can use it to bash things. Obviously, you can use technology for not good reasons. I think in person is, of course, better, but yeah, like I said, it's been encouraging to see how technology has been used to still further the gospel in this time. I mentioned Facebook and YouTube. There are other social media platforms that people have used to keep in touch. There's Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat. And a few years ago, Snapchat is not very old. It introduced a new idea to the social media game. There's a section in a Snapchat that is called Your Story. Your Story. I thought it was a cool, great, original idea. That's why my friends and I got it. It's also incredibly copyable. I know that Facebook and Instagram now also have sections called Story, which is why my friends and I have abandoned it. I don't know. I don't use Twitter, so I don't know if they have a story section or not. But I do know that it's become a popular thing, that just a picture or a video clip that only lasts for 24 hours. It's part of your immediate story. And I think that's so cool. It's a great idea because stories are so important. They are incredibly important. Maybe I'm biased as a story lover, but like people, we as a human race, we care about stories, and it can be for a variety of reasons. We might care about a story because we care about the person involved. Like it may not be that interesting of a scenario, but because, you know, that's our brother, that's our sister, that's our cousin, our best friend, you know, we're invested in that story. It could also be like the wow factor, the shock factor. Like, I barely know this guy, I met him once, but he's traveled the world. She went skydiving. Like that wow factor. We are intrigued. We want to see that story. This is why growing up, I was typically a bigger fan of English class than history class. And I'll explain why in a moment, why I wasn't as big a fan of history. But history was always, I don't know, it was always taught to me as a bunch of names, facts, dates, just a bunch of boring stuff. Like, who cares about that guy, what they did? But in English class, we got to read cool, awesome stories. We got to read like Tuck Everlasting, Number the Stars, Hamlet, Ivanhoe, The Outsiders, and many more. We got to read these stories. And I wasn't a fan of history class until my sophomore year in high school. I was 15 when a teacher of mine finally taught it, not as a bunch of facts and dates, like this person did that thing in this year, but he shared the story of how it happened, why it needed to happen, or why it didn't need to happen, but it still happened. He shared that history is made up, and I don't know how I didn't see it because it's right in the name, his story, that history is made up of stories. From that moment on, I have had a greater appreciation for history. And now I like both classes. But, you know, stories, whether they are fiction or nonfiction, stories have power. They have power, like I said, to grab our attention or to make us care. They can make grown men cry. They can make the most energetic of children stay quiet and listen. And they can crack smiles on the most stubborn of people. And ultimately, they can give a commonality, something in common between two or more people where there maybe wasn't anything there before. This is actually my personal theory why, and parents of teenagers, close your ears, why going to see a movie is a common first date. Because two things: one, if you're nervous, you don't have to talk to them for the 2 hours you're in the theater. Or if you don't know them, you don't know what to talk about, it gives you a commonality. You can ask them, hey, did you like the movie? Did you not? What character did you relate to? What was your favorite scene? You now have a commonality. If you don't know anything to talk to them about, you now have at least one thing. And not only are stories powerful, but they can catch the attention of powerful people. I'm going to give a few examples here. For example, Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes is a very popular character. His story has been told a number of different times in a variety of ways, but the author actually was not a fan of Sherlock Holmes. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, he didn't like his character, and so in a story, he killed him off. But then he was forced to bring him back, not by popular demand of the masses and all his readers, but because there was one important fan of Sherlock Holmes and of his writing, the Queen. The Queen was like, no, you're bringing that guy back. This happened a bit more recently. There was a sci-fi show that was canceled. It wasn't going to be renewed for its next season, but it got picked up and moved to Amazon Prime Watch, like their streaming service. Why? Because Jeff Bezos, the CEO, he liked it. So now it's there. Apparently he's stepping down now. We'll see if the show continues. But we also see this in the Bible. We see this in the Bible as well. King David, when the story of his murderous affair involving Bathsheba and Uriah, when Nathan the prophet comes to tell him, you done messed up, he doesn't just say, you messed up, you fool, because, I mean, you tell that to the king and you messed up, you're the fool. But he tells him this story, and he tells him a story that David can relate to. David grew up being a shepherd. Nathan's story involves sheep. He tells him the story of a rich man who has thousands of sheep. Like, you look at the hills, and the hills aren't green with grass. They are white because the fluffy sheep are there. And the one poor man who just has the one sheep. And the treachery of the rich man when a visitor comes. And it enrages David. It enrages emotions, hits him at core, and he can connect to it because he knows sheep. He knows what it's like to lose a sheep. He knows what it's like to not be able to save a sheep or to lose your livelihood. And then, of course, Nathan is like, you are that man. You are that man. In Scripture, there is a common story or narrative form. The majority of the stories in the Bible follow. And it's made up of 4 pieces: exposition, crisis, resolution, and conclusion. We have exposition, that's all the background details. It's setting up what you need to know in order to make sense of what's about to come. We have the crisis, that's the tensions are rising, there is a problem. And then we have resolution. How is that problem solved? How is it fixed? What is done in response to this crisis? And then we have conclusion, which is, now that it's been done, here's what life is like now. The conclusion might be pretty similar to the exposition, but if the crisis and the resolution involves making major changes, the conclusion may guide in a bit of a different direction than the exposition. I remember this because ECRC. If you noticed, my name, Ryan Comeau, is RC, and so I say it's ECRC. It's easy to remember. I wish it would work better if it's a Z, but it at least works for me. And I think this formula, it's good to know because it can help us see the story arc, where the story is going, of course. But I think this is even more important, a reason to know it, is it helps us see when it's broken or when it's altered, when it's twisted. And that's because when it's changed, when it's shifted, when it's twisted like that into something else, that it's designed to catch the reader's attention. The author did something intentional. He's like, hey, I want you to notice this is not your normal narrative that's happening right now. And we still do this today. When you watch movies or read books, you notice there's a basic structure to most stories. But when that is changed, we tend to call them plot twists. When there's a twist at the end of the story or something. The hero is the bad guy the entire time, something like that. And if there's no plot twist, there's typically something present in the story, the title and the advertising, something to try to draw in your attention, the reader or the viewer or the listener. So I'm going to give you an example of that right now. We're going to I'm going to share a story that you've probably heard a number of times before. We talked about King David earlier. This is a story from a little earlier in his life. It is the story of David and the princess. A little surprised? Thought you were expecting David and Goliath, but don't worry, I understand the confusion. There's a lot of overlap between the two stories. So don't worry, just sit tight. In 1 Samuel 17, that's when the story of, my Bible even calls it David and Goliath, so I understand, the mix up. You start seeing the exposition. The Philistines are attacking the camp of Israel. The crisis shows up and they introduce Goliath. But it's a little shaky because it goes back and forth, because then we learn David's exposition of why he is going, and then he learns about the crisis. And then we hear why David goes to fight Goliath. Of course, it's faith, it's standing up for God and God's people. That is definitely present. But there's some more stuff there, because David learns, he overhears from some people in the camp, that whoever kills Goliath gets to marry King Saul's daughter, the daughter of a king, a princess. So whoever kills Goliath gets to marry the princess. And he's like, say what now? And they repeat. They say, yeah, whoever marries Goliath. Whoever, see, I can't go back and edit that. Whoever kills Goliath marries the princess. Don't tell I hope maybe the heat was on and my wife couldn't hear the killing and the marrying words. But we can see that in 1 Samuel 17, verses 24 through 27. All the men of Israel, when they saw the man, the Goliath, fled from him and were much afraid. And the men of Israel said, have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel. And the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, the princess, and make his father's house free in Israel. And David said to the men who stood by him, what shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him in the same way. So shall it be done to the man who kills him. So maybe I changed some of the words, but I find it interesting that, yes, we see in there part of David's motivation is Goliath is picking on Israel. Goliath is picking on God. So hopefully I haven't ruined this story too much for you. Faith in God is still a major motivating factor in David's reason to do this. But especially seeing some of the situations David was in later in life, it would really not surprise me if the princess, was at least part of the motivation. And let's be honest, if Disney picked up this story, that is definitely the part they would emphasize. Add Saul's daughter right up there with Cinderella, Snow White, and Princess Leia, since Disney owns Star Wars now. But as I mentioned earlier, this story doesn't really follow the formula very well. It goes back and forth between exposition and crisis. Even after that moment, which is kind of both, David is learning about the setup, the exposition, while learning about the crisis. And later on, there's exposition of Saul's armor, but the crisis of it not fitting. It goes back and forth. It does not fit. And it moves really slow. When we think about it, there are a lot of sections in the Bible where there could be a story somewhere, but it moves really quickly. And so to illustrate that point, I'm going to take us to another section of the Bible, read you another story about my favorite judge. About my favorite judge. Hopefully, the muting. Do we want to try guessing who my favorite judge might be? If you want to unmute real quick and give out a guess. Family, don't guess. You know where this is going. If not, that's okay. A lot of people guess Samson because he's strong, and I mean, who doesn't like a good superhero story? That's what Samson's is. Other people guess Gideon because it's a war, battle, military. No, it's not Samson or Gideon. So they guess some of the other, still popular but lesser known, like Deborah, and I'm all for women's rights, but no, it's not Deborah, and Jephthah. And I was like, no, he's got a very interesting story, but no. And they say Ehud, the left-handed ninja, who breaks out of the house. I'm like, oh, no, good guesses, but no. My favorite judge is Shamgar. That's right, you heard me, Shamgar. I'm going to read you his entire story for you this morning, starting in Judges chapter 3, verse 31. Don't worry, also ending in Judges chapter 3, verse 31. After him was Shamgar, the son of Anath, who killed 600 of the Philistines with an ox goad. And he also saved Israel. The end. That is it. That is all we know about Shamgar. He is mentioned another time, but is literally just that, a mention. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that God or the Bible author messed up and only giving us this much of Shamgar's story. But as the story lover in me just goes nuts. Details. Where are the details? Here's a guy, here's his dad, 600 Philistines, and he kills them with an ox goad, which, by the way, I did not know what that was when I first came across this story, so I looked it up. You guys know what cattle prod is? Like the stick with, nowadays, a little electric shocker to prod your cattle? It's basically what an ox goad was, and they tended to be 10 feet long with a metal flat side on one end and a metal pointy side on the other. This isn't something you're just carrying around town with you. This is something that you're using, on your farm to prod the oxen along as they plow. So how did Shamgar's story go down? Was he out in the field plowing with his oxen with his ox goad, and he looks over and sees the 600 Philistines, and he's like, well, I don't have time to go back and get my sword, the thing I like fighting with. I'm just gonna hit him with this 10-foot pole. And I love the ending of that verse. And he also saved Israel. Just, side note. Oh, by the way, the entire reason the Jewish nation is alive today is because of this guy. But, no big deal. Just side note. And he also saved Israel. Details. And like I said, I'm sure it wasn't a mistake to record it this way. Either there wasn't much of a lesson to learn, or there was a lesson to learn that we're not supposed to, like maybe ox goads make fantastic weapons, I don't know. Or if there is a lesson, maybe we can learn it better through other stories. So I'm not saying that, the way this is recorded is a mistake. I'm just saying the story lover in me will very much appreciate meeting Shamgar someday and be like, dude, details. What on earth happened? What happened? But bizarrely enough, this story, as annoyed as I am at it, actually kind of follows the formula a little better. We have exposition, Shamgar, son of Anath. There is the crisis, 600 Philistines. There's the resolution, death by ox goad. And there is conclusion, and he also saved Israel. It fits really well. It fits a lot better than the David and the Princess or David and Goliath story. and notice it's because obviously we know David and Goliath's story a lot better than Shamgar's story. We teach that kids. Shamgar is a story I found by just accident reading through the Bible. And I was like, whoa, hold up. And obviously, I haven't had the time to go through and test this theory, or I've tested it, but I haven't gone through to prove it. I would probably, I mean, not a gambler, but I would put money on this that most, if not all of the big major stories that we know and we teach children, like the first stories we teach people when they're entering into the church or growing up in the church, break the formula because they're designed to stand out. They're designed to stick in our memory. Like I said, I haven't proven this theory. I've tested it here and there. I need your help testing it. Go back and look at some of these stories and see, do they follow the formula well or do they not? And like I said, it would not surprise me if most, if not all, of the major stories we know, David and Goliath, Noah's Ark, are all ones that are designed to stand out. Because this formula, as I said, was well known by biblical writers, biblical authors, and it was also known by Jesus himself. He told many parables while he was here on earth, and we're going to turn to one of them today. If you recognized the scripture reading, you probably know which one we're going to. We're going to Luke chapter 15, the story of the Prodigal Son. As you turn there, I like calling Luke 15 the lost chapter. Not because it's mysteriously gone or anything, like one of my friends thought I meant, but because the stories in it are about the lost sheep and the lost coin and then the lost son. So it's the lost chapter. And we're going to start off the story of the prodigal son in verses 11 and 12. And he said, that he is Jesus telling the story, and he said, there was a man who had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me. And he divided his property between them. Other versions will call this inheritance, not just dividing the property, but dividing the inheritance. And I think it's pretty clear, we can see which son is going to be the prodigal son here, the younger one, who asks for his inheritance, which is something that you normally don't get from someone until that person dies. So younger son is like, hey, dad, can you just die already? I want your money. I want your goods. So clearly the father is already dead to the younger son in his eyes. And it's crazy. It's like, if you've seen Lion King, the song where Simba sings, oh, I just can't wait to be king. Well, when you remember how monarchies work, he's saying, oh, I just can't wait till dad dies? Question mark. Spoiler alert, I guess be careful what you wish for. But anyways, the younger son is like, hey, dad, can you die already? And we all know the story. He takes the money, he goes away, he squanders the wealth, and really poor timing because then a famine hits. And so he's like, I need a job, I need to eat. And so he gets this job feeding pigs. And that's when he realizes just how destitute he is at that moment, because he's looking at the pigs eating and of the pigs. And so that's when he hatches the plan of going back to his father's house, but as a servant, because he's like, I have already basically said I want my dad dead. There's no way I'm coming back as a son. I'm going to go back as a servant. And we see this picking up the story in verse 20. And he arose and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. And I love the father's response. But the father said to his servants, bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. And bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. The father just straight up ignores the son. We don't know if the father heard the younger son's little prepared speech, but if he did, he chose not to acknowledge it whatsoever. And I don't know how you feel about the story. Maybe you connect, maybe you don't. If you're like me, who grew up in the church and heard this story a bunch of times, I never really related. It was actually my wife and I were talking about what some of our biggest rebellions were, a few weeks ago, and I realized that my rebellion was finding finding a TV show meant for 18 and older when I was 16 and watching a couple episodes. And obviously I wouldn't recommend doing that, of course. But when that's your biggest rebellion, I'm like, did I really rebel? I don't know. You can ask my parents. Maybe they'll have a better answer for you. But in junior high, the senior pastor at the church I attended, he was doing a sermon series on the lost things in Luke 15. And so, of course, one week he preached on the lost sheep. The second week he preached on the lost coin. And the third week he preached about the lost son. Those are the three stories. Those are the three parables in Luke 15. But the series lasted for 4 weeks. So I'm thinking, what is he going to talk about? A lost parable, like the lost parable, But no, he talked about the older son. And ever since then, I realized that this story should really be called the Prodigal Sons, because we pick up the older son's story back in verse 25. Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, "Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has received him back safe and sound." But he was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him, but he answered his father, "Look, these many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed your command, yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came," notice he's not even willing to call him his brother, "this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him." And he said to him, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found." So as we read the older son's story, I have a question for you. Where's the end? What conclusion is there to the older son's story? Is there a secret verse 33 lying around in there? I haven't found it. My Bible doesn't have it. And that's because I don't think Jesus said it, which means you have to look, because the younger son, he has the full story. He has exposition. He has crisis. He squanders the money. He has resolution. He decides to go back home, and the father's resolution is even better than his. And then his conclusion is with a party, with music and good food and dancing. And since there's dancing, it may not be an Adventist party, but still a good party. They're happy that he's home, right? The older son, we have exposition. We learn that there is an older son. We learn that he's here. And then there is crisis. And the crisis is basically the resolution and conclusion of the younger son's story. He is upset. And I say there's resolution, but I understand if you want to say there's only really half, because the father comes out in an attempt to resolve the crisis. But there is no conclusion. There is no conclusion. Younger son has all 4 parts. Older son only has 3. And I wouldn't blame you if you said 2.5. So Jesus broke the formula. And so now we're left asking why? Why did he break this commonly known, always used narrative formula? And we'll find the answer to that in the same chapter, Luke 15, in verses 1 and 2. We won't find an ending to the story, but we will find an answer. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to him. And the Pharisees and the scribes grumbled, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." And that is the prompting to the story of the lost sheep, to the story of the lost coin, and the story of the lost sons. And because you see, the younger son, he represents the sinners and the tax collectors. They left. They were gone from the house. They weren't in church. They weren't in Christ's body. They weren't in God. But they came back. They came back home. The older son represents the Pharisees, people who were in the house, people who were always in the house, but they're grumbling. Because the younger son and the sinners, there's an ending to the younger son's story because their story, it has a resolution, it has a conclusion. Their story has an ending because it's over. They're at the feet of Jesus. They're partying with him. But the older son, the Pharisees, there is no ending. And the reason for that is because of hope. Jesus is breaking the formula to appeal to the Pharisees, to appeal to maybe some of us who never left the house today, that your story isn't over. Your story isn't over. It's hope that you can make the decision to go in and join the party. And so I ask you today, how is your story? And I mean no judgment whatsoever in that question. I can very easily ask myself, how is my story going? I can tell you there are things going on. I've resolved one crisis. I'm now in another. I'm not quite ready to talk about either one. My story is kind of in a mess right now too. Are you in exposition? Are you in crisis? Are you in resolution or conclusion? And if we're being honest, life does not fit the formula very well at all. As I brought up, I'm in the resolution of one story or the conclusion, but I'm in the crisis of another. Life is choppy. It goes back and forth. You can have multiple stories going at the same time, and it's a cycle through the process. But the themes are still present. The themes of story are still present in life, even though it is complicated. I think it's safe to say the world has been in crisis. COVID-19 crisis, hopefully with vaccine and mask wearing and all this stuff, we'll see a resolution and conclusion soon, but this has been a long, drawn-out crisis that we have all gone through together. But making it personal, your story, your life is your story, and God cares. And you see, the prodigal son, whenever we tell that story, people always make a big deal about how the father came running out to meet the son. And it's a good thing. It's a good point. We should keep emphasizing that. I don't mean to belittle or downgrade that point. But there's another just as important point. And that is the father left the party to meet his son. We serve a God that is willing to run to you. We serve a God that is willing to leave the party for you. We serve a God that did leave the party for us and ran to us, showing us his perfect love when he sacrificed himself for us. We serve a God that willingly put himself into a crisis so that he could be our resolution and guide us into his perfect conclusion. As I said, I don't know your story. I don't know your crises. I don't know what your crisis is. I don't know what you're going through. But I do know what, or rather who, your resolution should be. Today is to accept God's resolution, to go inside his love, to go in the house, join the party, and let him guide your story. Thank you.